The new characters in Overwatch 2 show a fundamental change in Blizzard's design philosophy, and especially with Ramatra, the newest edition, it really kind of clarifies what is going to be Blizzard's new way to create characters for the foreseeable future, what direction they're going in with their new additions, and what can we anticipate for future characters down the line. There's a lot we gotta break down and talk about, but hey, I just got fired, and that's not a cap. I actually just got fired from my full-time job, so if you would give me a pity, like and subscribe. I'm just kidding, you don't have to do any of that, but I really did get fired. So I'm gonna be doing full-time content for the foreseeable future, which includes streaming, so go check out my Twitch links down below and press that follow so you don't miss out on my first stream. If you need some private coaching, or if you want to support the channel, go check out my Patreon. Links will be in the description as well, and let's get into the video. Now, so far, we've gotten 3 new characters for Overwatch 2. Sojourn, Junker Queen, and Kiriko, 1 for each of the 3 roles, and then also, we're getting Ramatra very, very soon. And we can look at these characters from the top down and identify key things that Blizzard is doing different for the new design philosophy, and things that we can expect in the future for the new heroes down the line. And at first glance, the thing that we really need to point out is the fact that these characters are a lot more complex than they ever have been in the past. This is the graphic that's going around on Twitter right now, the Ramatra comparison compared to Cassidy. And yeah, I know that Cassidy has more abilities than this, but the big point here is that some characters in the past have very basic abilities, while a lot of the newer characters have like a giant wall of abilities, tons of different variations to their abilities, and a lot of these abilities are a lot more complex, rather than some of the older characters in the game that have some very base level abilities with not a lot of variations, just really simple stuff. Now, this isn't true for every single one of the older characters. I want to make that clear. There are a lot of characters that existed in the past that do have a giant amount of abilities and complexity in the decision-making trees. Characters like Sigma and Echo, and some amount of the complexity just comes from trying to create an interesting character, right? You're trying to create something new and exciting, so you just add on a pile of abilities to a character and make them unlike anything we've ever seen. But especially when we look at some of the new characters that are added most recently, and especially Ramatra, we see a couple of really interesting things. And the first thing that we see is skill is at the forefront. When you give players so much diverse options and decision making, and then in addition to that, you put mechanical skill at the forefront. So Ramatra, for instance, the primary fire is something that does have headshot crit damage. It didn't have to have that, but they added that in to add an extra layer of skill. So as a different direction, they could have took Ramatra to make Ramatra just a little bit easier with their primary fire, slightly up the base damage, and then remove the ability to headshot. This would level out the playing field between people that could aim and people that couldn't. And that's just one example of a change that they could have put in that would raise the base value of the character regardless of skill, but they decided to actually give you extra incentive for having that mechanical skill on top of the character. And that's not even to say about all the crazy decision making that we have throughout the character. There's a ton of decision making in Ramatra from fight to fight. Not only with your mechanical skill are you gonna have to be on point, but all your decisions are gonna have to be on point as well. And I want to really kind of emphasize how important it is for them to do this, because they're doing the same thing with Kiriko. When you have a character that has very different amounts of value for getting criticals, the idea behind doing something like that with Kiriko is it really creates a value gap when you actually start to become very good mechanically, and that can create other problems at the higher ranks and with balance and things like that. But it is important that when you actually go at this from a balanced point of view, you're putting skill first. You're putting skill at the forefront, and you're making it so characters don't just get value purely based on your decisions. Mechanical skill is a huge part of that, and you're allowing a player to get more and more value the better their skill gets. They're not capped at a certain mechanical threshold, nor do they get a lot of value automatically without having any mechanical skill. While some parts of a character's kit could be accessed without having that mechanical skill, which is basically unavoidable, there are huge aspects of these characters that if you just can't hit your shots mechanically, you just won't be able to perform at a decently high level. And that's good overall because it's bringing Overwatch back towards a first-person shooter. I think that one of the biggest criticisms of Overwatch, and not everyone's going to agree with this, but this is one of the true criticisms that a lot of people have, is that Overwatch started to feel way too much like a MOBA. It felt more like a game where your cooldown usage and your game sense slash positioning was all that mattered, and your mechanical skill almost never mattered. It was basically put to the complete back seat. And at the end of the day, Overwatch is still a shooter, and I think that it's important to find a balance where you have to have all components, but we basically had several pillars that were hoisted up, and mechanical skill was basically put way far down. But ever since basically Overwatch 2, we've seen a huge shift in the design philosophy, where we're seeing these characters actually all have really high peaks in skill, right? Junker Queen, of course, she's underpowered, and she's probably getting buffs come Season 2, but we do know that she is not only a character that has a ton of decisions that you have to make, mechanically there is some difficulty with her as well. Not only with just the way in which you're going to combine some of your abilities, but being able to hit long distance knives and stick it to a target, combine it with your abilities properly. I think that Junker Queen's a great tank because it actually has a layer of mechanical difficulty in addition to decision making difficulty combined in one. Sojourn, of course, is a character that does require a lot of mechanical skill, and while she's definitely overtuned, and that's a balanced discussion, not talking about the design of the character, Sojourn is a character that is mechanically demanding to use, and you get rewarded for mastering the character. Now, is that reward too much right now? Yes, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the design of the character. Kiriko, same thing, a character that gets really rewarded for applying mechanical skill on top of proper decision making and balancing of your abilities. So you see that mechanics actually matter with a lot of these characters, and I think that that's a really good thing, and that's something that we're seeing consistently, and that's something that we're also seeing with Ramattra just based on how the character is built. And in addition to that, we're seeing extra complexity to a character like Ramattra, and a lot of people on Twitter are like, this is power creep, this is power creep. And while I'm not gonna lie to you, Ramattra could be completely busted and overpowered, and that's probably gonna be the case. Who will be kidding? It's probably gonna be true. It doesn't have to do with how many abilities this character has, nor does it have to do with how this character is designed or created, because honestly, a lot of what this character does hits all the check marks for what could be a really great character. Has incredibly high mechanical peaks? Check. Is a character that has a diverse suite of abilities that require decisions moment to moment? Check. I think that it's really great to have like a barrier, for instance, that has a lot of health, but is on a huge cooldown and can be placed at one location. That means that you have to be very strategic with where you place it. It's not something that just gives you inherent value. It's something that you have to time properly in a designated window, not something that just generates value for free. So in addition to having characters that put mechanics as an important pillar of your success, we're also seeing more complexity in your decision making and more importance in making the proper decision at the proper time. Just like when we look at a character like Kiriko that not only has mechanical complexity and a higher ceiling when you master mechanical skill, but it's a character that can also have huge impact over the battlefield depending on how and when you make your decisions. When you use a Suzu, how you use it, when you teleport to a teammate, and when you teleport away, how you play and position from moment to moment. And I think the third thing that we need to talk about is the move away from what I like to call the rock, paper, scissors of design. This is a big problem that we're running into right now when we look at a lot of the tanks that were created back before, where tanks didn't have a ton of diverse options to them that were kind of expressed in different ways. We instead have tanks that are really good at one thing, and this is creating what I would call a rock, paper, scissors meta, where you have one tank that counters another tank, and one tank counters that tank, and the first tank counters that third tank, and it's like over and over again, you're just swapping tanks to counter each other, right? This is something that can really easily happen when you have characters that don't have a lot of complexity. They have their power level and abilities do one thing and good at one thing, but they're weak against a different type of axis. So this really creates that rock, paper, scissors counter meta where you have one character that is really good against a certain type of playstyle, but if they're not playing that playstyle, you swap to another character that is, and then they swap, and then you swap, and then they swap, and then you swap. What we're really seeing Blizzard attempt here, now I'm not going to say that they have done it perfectly yet, but this is what they're attempting. They're attempting to create characters that have a lot more gray matchups rather than black and white matchups. So a character that can be more effective against a wider range of different things because the character doesn't have just one way they can play. Rather than having a character that's like, I'm good at diving, or I'm good at doing this is the playstyle I'm going to keep doing. But if the enemy team have characters that are good against this thing that I'm good at, then my character's not going to get a ton of value. You have a character that has the flexibility to say, I can play in this way and still be powerful, or I can play in this way and still be powerful. Perhaps I'm not going to be as strong as the other people, like perhaps Ramatra's Brawl isn't going to be as strong as Brawl characters, and perhaps Ramatra's Poke isn't going to be as strong as some of the Poke tanks, but it's going to be good enough that you have extra layers of flexibility, and then there's a skill ceiling that's applied on top of that that can make up the difference if you're good enough. So this doesn't force you to swap nearly as much, and instead you can adapt your play style, and it basically tries to pull you away from this counter swap meta. That's the idea anyway, and I don't know if they're going to be able to succeed in this. I think it's really ambitious, especially because you can't just apply this to all the characters that have already existed in the past that still create that rock, paper, scissors meta, but it is interesting that that's what they're attempting. And to bring this video back full circle, I think that this complexity, or this crazy complexity of characters, when we see something like Ramatra have a million abilities, it's seen as a bad thing. It's seen as power creep. And I've already made a video addressing power creep with characters like Sojourn and Kiriko and potentially Ramatra, but you gotta understand that the power creep problem doesn't come from this complexity. In fact, this complexity can be a really, really great thing for the future, creating a much less rock, paper, scissors meta, and something that is a lot, you know, more diverse, and you could be flexible with your playstyle rather than your picks. And I think that that's a good thing for the future of the game, as long as you make sure to balance and make sure that some of the things don't become too overly powerful and oppressive. You keep the power level of these things low and in a reasonable spot. And it actually makes me quite excited about the future of hero design, and I think Ramatra is really going in a direction that I personally like. But of course, that's only assuming that they get the numbers right. I mean, if you give a character this much flexibility and you make every single part of their character too powerful, right? Because in my example, the Brawl needed to be weaker than a Brawl character. The Poke needed to be weaker than a Poke character. So if you make all of these things too strong and you give a character just infinite options and power in every option, then we have a busted ass meta. So it's about finding that balance. But as far as the design of the character and the idea behind it, I'm 100% on board, but we're gonna have to wait and see what happens. You let me know how you feel about Ramatra and all of the characters that Blizzard have introduced in Overwatch 2, whether that's Sojourn, Drunker Queen, Kiriko. Power level aside, just about the character design, the ability to design, the skill at the forefront, the complex trees of decision making, and of course the rock, paper, scissors meta. Definitely let me know how you feel about all of that in the comments down below. Smash that like, subscribe if you enjoy the content, and I'll see you next time.